So, Guy, I'm looking through some vinyl out here at my beach house, which is obviously what we do when we're here socially distancing. Um, Give me your top five Zeppelin coronavirus desert island tracks to get
Well,
you through.
so first five desert island tracks from Zeppelin. Stairway's the number one song. You're going to tell me it's an overrated, overrated. Stairway is by far number one.
Okay.
Kashmir number two. When the Levee Breaks number three. Ramble On number four. And I'll give you Over the Hills and Far Away off Houses for number five. How's that?
You clearly thought about this, and it's not as if we don't do this every commercial.
You just asked me the question. Well, I didn't think about it.
No, but I mean, if people got a chance to be sitting on set with us at Fast Money, they can see we do this pretty much every commercial break. Yeah, I mean, this is going to surprise you a little bit. First of all, did you give me 1 through 5 or 5 count down to 1?
1 was Stairway, and then we went the other way.
Why not a little suspense? Anyway,
there is no suspense.
What I'm doing. Tangerine, number 5.
Wow.
Yeah, Livin' Love, Heartbreaker, Livin' Lovin' Mate. I'm counting them as one song, by the way. Are 4. Kashmir's number 3. Thank You, number 2. You can hear I'm kind of sensitive guy here between Tangerine and Thank You, and then number 1. It's got to be Stairway to Heaven. I believe it's at where the track's at 5 minutes and 55 or 56 seconds, where it goes into that lead, and every single time I want to roll down the windows of my car and let it rip. Anyway, speaking of let it rip, let's talk about the markets here. Clearly Q1 not letting it rip, and in fact, as I hold my Louisville Slugger here, I'd say the market's playing hurt going into the second quarter. Size it up for me.
But market's clearly playing hurt. Worst quarter, I think, on record, which is obviously saying something, and probably rightly so, given where we were and given what's going on in the world over the last 3 weeks or so. So although it seems panicked and all it seems extraordinarily quick, it actually makes a lot of sense. Your point, what's next? And unfortunately, although I do think there's maybe a little bit more of a rally, maybe another 150 or so S&P points to the upside, I do think that inevitably we're going to trade down to that 2030 level in the S&P 500, which if you go back and look, sort of a 50% retracement of the the 667 low from March of 09 and the recent all-time high. That makes sense given the environment. I hope I'm wrong, but my concern is, the peak of this whole coronavirus thing is not going to happen for the next 7 to 10 days. I think that could be really seriously bad for the broader market.
I just don't know why we have to retest. I mean, this whole thing about March of 2009 is something that bothers me a little bit, especially with a market that, and I don't like this about the market we saw for the last 18 months, but whether it's December 24th, that Christmas Eve 2018 low, it was a V-shaped recovery. Now, I can't presume this is a V, and we came into this at peak labor, and we've spent time talking about the depth, the size, the unprecedented nature of the stimulus response. I'll say this. I think based upon some recovery we're starting to see around the world, if we were, and I know you weren't, but if a lot of market players before the coronavirus had us at all-time highs, is this alone, if you can remove this and shorten this, and we're not doctors, but 6 to 8 more weeks of this, is that enough to change the landscape of the global economy?
So here you go. So I can't speak global economy, but the U.S. economy, for example, and and I know, and I'm not saying I know, but I think it comes down to one of two things is going to happen. Either there's so much pent-up demand that people are going to go out and buy so much stuff and go on so many trips, it's going to make your head spin. Or the other side, which is sort of scary, but might actually make sense, people might, over the next few weeks, learn to live with less. And they might say to themselves, you know what? We didn't really need to go out and buy all that stuff and take all those crazy trade trips. And maybe being home with your family is really all it comes down to. So when you're talking about a U.S. economy that's 73% driven by people buying things, if people have learned to live with less, that's problematic, not in terms of society-wise, but in terms of what it means for the broader markets in our economy.
But you know that the U.S. consumer can't live with less, and you point this out all the time on Fast Money. So look, the one thing that I'll leave on my market view, and we'll start to move into some other stuff. But I am worried about credit markets, and I know that can be almost sometimes too esoteric for for a lot of folks on the equity market. It's not that they don't understand credit. I'm just saying we know that credit markets often lead the equity markets. And what we do know is that there is essentially this triple B tranche, one notch above junk. That's 3 times the size of the high yield market, by the way, that what I'm hearing and some of the stuff I'm looking at tells me 30 to 40% of that could get downgraded. The credit cycle is what this is all about for me, and that concerns me. So
yeah, I agree with that. And it's good that you're holding it back because your team, the Metropolitans, again, nobody's playing baseball anytime soon. But you saw the news about Noah Syndergaard. Obviously,
I saw it.
Wins the CNBC stock draft in tremendous fashion. Good for him. He was a little shy, but I enjoyed meeting him.
He wasn't shy, dude. He was cerebral.
No, stop. You're embarrassing yourself now. I mean, there are a lot of words I've used. Cerebral's not one, but he's on the list for a while. You're not going to see him for a long time.
He outdid major market pundits like myself. Okay, which obviously isn't saying much, but yeah, I don't like the way they snuck him into Tommy John surgery while there was no TV, no New York Post sports page for all that matter. And I'm sitting out here at the beach, barely saw it. I'm bummed out. Noah, get better soon. Guy, who's playing hurt out there, though?
That's the thing. Who's playing hurt in retail world? And Macy's was playing very hurt going into this. And now you have to ask yourself, is this something they can recover from? I mean, at its zenith, at its apex, Macy's was Noah Syndergaard throwing 99, 100 and knocking the bat out of people's hands. But those days have passed. And
whoa. I don't like what you're doing with Noah's fastball right now. Are you telling me he's not going to throw that kind of juice again?
It's very hard to come back. I'm just telling you. I think he's got a 65% chance of coming back to that. I think Macy's has a 15% chance of coming back from that. So Macy's is not only playing hurt, they might not be able to recover. And then you look on the other side of the coin, like a Dollar Gen that I think got upgraded today. It's just been crushing it. So you have to ask yourself, is the retail landscape changing? And I think the answer is 100% yes.
I have to agree with you. And I look at also the trends that we're going into this crisis. Look, e-commerce, it's not that we needed to talk about this. This was the story of 2 to 3 years ago. But there's no question mall traffic, Butkus, no question to me, Macy's is a company that's the victories now are being defined in it's kind of like, can we get our starter to go 6 innings instead of 5 and be happy because he's saving the bullpen? I think what I mean by that metaphor is Macy's doing a little bit more with less is not my idea of something. A company that I think is part of the haves, not the have-nots, that's been playing hurt, obviously, is a Starbucks. And what I like about the Starbucks story is going into the coronavirus, these guys were showing U.S. same-store sales up 6%. Their China business, which was always part of the story, they closed 75% of their China stores, and yet they just announced numbers. And again, we're starting to see some resurgence in China. I think Kevin Johnson is one of the great operators. In some ways, I look at the Kevin Johnson ascension as Howard Schultz stepped down, similar to the Tim Cook, Steve Jobs scenario. In other words, the guy that really was running the company and maybe wasn't seen as the charismatic vision. I love Kevin Johnson. I love Starbucks after the crisis.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. That was the right person to come in at the right time. And the brand is I'm not saying it's Teflon, but it's pretty close. And the fact that they can survive, I wouldn't say they're thriving, but can get through this speaks volumes as to what Kevin Johnson has done. And I'm glad you said Howard Schultz and not Charles Schultz like you've done before on the show. And quickly, before we have to go, I'm riding the Peloton a lot as well. And I heard you listened to the fan this morning, and my man Greg Giannotti talked about following me on Peloton. I followed him back. I mean, I love that stuff.
First of all, that's weird. That's some major bromance. I'm not sure I'm not going to follow my boys riding a bike. All right. I'm just saying that. But I love the fact that somehow you've got Boomer and Gio, who obviously we love. Boomer also, who's probably the same sports allegiance as I do. And that means he's a Met fan. How is it that they call you the Yankee fan onto the, ultimately to Boomer and Gio's show to talk about my Mets?
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? And then I just completely throttle the Mets. And I tell them, it's like I'm telling them I'm about to throw a fastball and I throw it and they still can't hit it. I love it. And by the way, the real genius of that show is Al Dukes, and we should tag him on this. But that's for another time.
No kidding.
I think what it comes down to is here we are in another quarter, challenging times ahead, but I think we'll get through it. We'll all get through it at some point.
The levee broke in the first quarter, folks, but we may be going to the stairway to heaven in the second quarter. Great to see you, Guy. See you soon.
Ramble on, Tim.